Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we're jumping straight into the story of John Flynn and the Mantle of Safety. Guys, this is an absolutely thrilling story of survival, empathy, and some seriously groundbreaking innovation out in the vast Australian outback. We're heading deep into the unforgiving interior to unpack the life of a man who fundamentally flipped the script on how we handle distance in medical care. His vision was so massive, so incredibly impactful, that it literally redrew the boundaries of what was possible in remote rescue. Let's dive in.
To really grasp the magnitude of this story, I need you to put yourself in the shoes of an early 20th century Outback settler. Just imagine for a second being a full 3 weeks away from the nearest doctor. What on earth do you do when a medical emergency strikes? The main villain in this story isn't a person, right? It is sheer deadly distance. You are hundreds of kilometers from a clinic or even a town. If things go south, there's no picking up a smartphone to dial for help. You are completely, terrifyingly isolated.
And look, that isolation brought incredible daily life or death stakes. Settlers, indigenous communities, miners, cattle workers, they all faced a pretty brutal reality out there. We're talking about horrific accidents with heavy machinery or livestock, and absolutely zero medical backup. Picture facing complicated childbirths totally alone in the brush, dealing with severe, unyielding droughts, and just crushing loneliness. Throw in the fact that you had next to no access to basic community staples like schools or churches, and while you start to get a picture of everyday life in the Australian interior. Enter John Flynn. Born back in 1880 in Mollyagul, he grew up with this really deep concern for the folks living through these exact hardships. Fast forward to 1911, he's a newly ordained Presbyterian minister, and he gets appointed superintendent of the Australian Inland Mission. As he traveled across this massive, remote interior, he saw those harsh realities up close and personal. And here's where his brilliance really shines. He realized that traditional ministry, just preaching on a Sunday, it simply wasn't going to cut it. It wasn't enough to save these forgotten regions. So by 1928, he decided to take some monumental action. That action was driven by this one wildly powerful concept he called the Mantle of Safety. It's a great name, isn't it? This was Flynn's ultimate dream. He basically envisioned throwing a giant protective safety net of care right over the vast Australian outback. He was absolutely convinced that his compassion required practical, boots-on-the-ground action. His goal? To make sure that literally no one was deprived of medical care, pastoral support, or just emotional hope simply because of their zip code. Geography, in his mind, should never be a death sentence.
So how exactly do you build a safety net over millions of square kilometers? Well, Flynn wasn't just a big ideas guy. He was a serious, comprehensive problem solver. He knew that to care for the whole person, you had to tackle physical healing, spiritual encouragement, and community development all at once. His game plan was multi-layered. First, build physical hospitals and nursing stations. Second, set up reliable pastoral care. And then, the real game changers. Roll out emergency transportation and figure out a way to get reliable communication out into the middle of nowhere.
Let's talk about that transportation piece for a second, because this is huge. Before 1928, if you needed to reach an injured person by road, it could take agonizing days, sometimes even weeks. Obviously, by the time help finally showed up, it was often way too late. But Flynn completely changed the game here. He launched the Aerial Medical Service, which, by the way, we now know as the Royal Flying Doctor Service. Practically overnight, you had doctors taking direct flights to patients in these remote outposts. It slashed treatment times and was an absolute miracle of using aviation for humanitarian aid.
But there was a massive missing puzzle piece. Airplanes are incredible, sure, but they're totally useless if the isolated patients have absolutely no way to actually call them. Keep in mind the context of the outback back then. There was zero electrical grids out there. You couldn't just plug a telephone into a wall jack. These folks were completely 100% off the grid, so how on earth do you call in an airplane when you don't even have a light switch? Well, this is where the story gets even more fascinating. Flynn actually teamed up with an inventor named Alfred Traeger and pushed him to solve this exact bottleneck. The result? The legendary pedal-powered radio. Yeah, you heard that right. You literally had to jump on a stationary bike and pedal your heart out to generate enough electricity just to radio for a doctor. It was affordable, it was totally ingenious, and this specific combo of airplanes and pedal power completely revolutionized life in the Australian interior.
This brings us beautifully to the core guiding principle behind his entire mission. If we can bring the doctor to the patient, we can save lives. I know it sounds super simple to us today, but back then it required this incredible marriage of deep empathy and absolute cutting-edge technology to make it real. Flynn believed that serving others was the practical expression of faith and that compassion should cross every single geographic barrier. By combining wings and radio waves, he essentially conquered that deadly outback isolation.
John Flynn dedicated his life to this mission, passing away at the age of 70 in Sydney back in 1951. But his passing wasn't just some quiet, unnoticed event. Not at all. His funeral was this massive, moving testament to his impact. You had church leaders, top medical professionals, government officials, and just countless everyday people showing up. People whose lives had been directly saved or touched by his sheer determination and medical innovations.
He left behind a humanitarian legacy that honestly remains almost completely unparalleled in Australian history. Like I mentioned, he founded the Royal Flying Doctors Service, which is still operating today, doing amazing work providing emergency retrievals and primary care across the interior. He successfully led the Australian Inland Mission, and here's a fun fact to show just how vital he became to the national identity. His portrait was actually featured on the Australian $20 banknote for a solid 25 years. Pretty incredible, right?
So that leaves us with one final, really provocative thought. John Flynn looked at the suffering of isolated people, and he used the absolute bleeding-edge tech of his day to solve it. He proved that distance should never, ever prevent someone from receiving basic care. Looking at our world right now, what's our equivalent? How can we take Flynn's blueprint, this amazing blend of empathy and modern innovation, and use it to create a brand new mantle of safety for the isolated and forgotten people of our time? It's a heavy question, but a powerful one to carry with you. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep learning.